Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar presented by the Brain Injury Association of America. Today's topic is helping kids thrive at school after brain injury. Today's attendees are all muted. If you have any questions, please type it using the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and our presenter will answer questions at the end. Dr. Brenda Egan-Johnson is director of the Brain Steps Brain Injury School Consulting Program. She has 3 decades of experience in pediatric brain injury. She holds a doctorate from Johns Hopkins University, specializing in mind, brain, and teaching, and a master's degree in education and human development from George Washington University. She is a certified brain injury specialist trainer with advanced practice in neurorehabilitation and serves on BIAA's ACPIS Board of Governors. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. So I am really excited to be here today. Unfortunately, I cannot see my chat box. So Laura, I may need some help at the end because I don't want to mess up the slides if I hunt for it right now.
Yeah, I can read the questions at the end for you.
Okay, thank you. So I packed a lot of information into today's hour, and I hope that you find some value in it. I know a lot of you here are parents and caregivers, which I am so happy. I think the majority of you today are parents and caregivers, and that warms my heart because I am a sibling of my brother had a severe traumatic brain injury when I was 14, he was 12, and he turned 13 in the hospital. He sustained a severe brain injury and while he was riding his bike. And I, without realizing it, was put on my path. And that path was to ensure as best I could that I could learn everything I could about brain injury and schools and learning and behavior so that I could help families in the future, which is now. So I could help families who are going through every parent's worst nightmare sometimes and help them when their child goes back to school and then until they graduate. So with that being said, my name is Brenda, and I am the director of a program in Pennsylvania called Brain Steps. Brain Steps stands for Strategies Teaching Educators, Parents, and Students, and we assist students, schools, and families in our state following acquired brain injury. Brain Steps is also in Colorado. So if any of you are in Colorado, we have a program there also. Not a lot of states have programs like this. There is one in Oregon, and there's other initiatives that are being done in states, such as Tennessee's doing things. There's a lot of states doing things around kids with brain injury, but not a lot of Department of Education programming. Our program in Pennsylvania was created by our Department of Health in 2007, so we are entering our 19th year. We are funded and jointly owned by the Pennsylvania Department of Health and Pennsylvania Department of Education Bureau of Special Education, and we're implemented through the Brain Injury Association of Pennsylvania. I am the director of this program. I have 29 brain injury consulting teams that I oversee in our state. We cover all 500 public school districts, and we have currently over 200 brain injury school consultants that do the work of supporting students with brain injury when they go back to school. I just wanted to let you know about this program because we do have free trainings available online. So there's some resources, some training, and also my contact information if you ever have questions or anything like that. But now we're going to get into our actual training. So we're going to talk about how a brain injury can affect a child. We're going to talk about challenges children may face when they return to school after a brain injury. And then we're going to delve into some real concrete strategies so that you can leave today with some actionable plans. So before we begin that, we have to talk about the terms we're going to be using. So I'm going to talk about acquired brain injury. What that means is any brain injury that has occurred after a child is born. And that includes 2 kinds of brain injuries. One is called non-traumatic, and non-traumatic brain injuries are caused by internal causes. So that could be something like a virus, or a stroke, a brain tumor, anything that is lead poisoning, mold toxicity, PANS, PANDAS, things like that. Traumatic brain injuries that are in the pink are caused by external causes. So when I think of traumatic brain injury, I think of um, car crashes or a fall or a sports related injury or recreation injury. So anything that is an external force. You do not actually have to hit your head on something to sustain a brain injury. So just keep that in mind. You can just the jolting motion, front to back, side to side, done with enough force, like in a car crash, could cause a brain injury called a traumatic brain injury. So for today, we're going to call it ABI, acquired brain injuries. Acquired brain injury is a leading cause of death and disability in children and young adults, according to the Centers for Disease Control. Medically, brain injury is that leading cause. However, in the educational field, so in schools nationwide, public schools, brain injury is considered a low incidence disability. The reason for this, well, there are a multitude of reasons why. We're going to touch on some of them. But what this means is students are returning to school. They are not being properly identified as having a brain injury. And sometimes they are being misidentified as having maybe um, an emotional disorder rather than a brain injury. And that's just one example. And this can lead to inappropriate educational planning. If a student is not having an educational plan and supports to support their specific brain injury, that can cause issues with learning. True or false? The majority of teachers and other school staff receive training and identification and academics and in the academic support needs of students with acquired brain injury. The answer to that, unfortunately, is false. Nationwide, the research shows that teachers and school staff do not receive the level of training and identification that they require to really be able to appropriately support students with brain injury. Instead, what seems to be happening is they may have a student with a brain injury in their class or return to their class, and then they search out resources, or maybe they are in a lucky state that has a program that they can tap into for consultation and training needs to help them. But overall, it's not being taught in an in-depth way for teachers who are at the college level, who are learning to be teachers, or even once they are at the school level. Now, all that to say that concussion education has gotten better, and many, many schools now have concussion education, but we still have a long way to go. So, due to this lack of teacher training in brain injury for teachers, they often don't know the effects of a brain injury, what it looks like initially, and what it can look like over time for a student. They may not know how to identify a student with a brain injury, support that student, teach that student. And also, brain injury mimics other kinds of disabilities. And we want to make sure that students who have a brain injury and go back to school, that the school is aware they have a brain injury. It needs to be in their formal educational file. Because if not, all of this can lead to misinformed statements and opinions and beliefs that the teachers hold about the student with a brain injury. And a very common one is, because a student after a brain injury may physically recover quickly, often teachers may think that they're completely recovered, but you can't see a brain injury typically. You can't see the brain, right? We don't put necessarily bandages or casts on our heads, so it is an invisible injury. So, what are the effects of a brain injury? We're going to go through this part very quickly because you could do a quick Google search to find any of this information out. So, brain injury is an energy crisis. Every child that has a brain injury, every child, even if it's a concussion, will have three issues typically right off the bat. They will have issues with their cognitive or mental fatigue, which means they tire very quickly. They will be slower to process things. So that's their processing speed. And they will have some issues with short term memory. Some will get better, others may experience this lifelong. Now, gave you a lot of handouts. One of the handouts that I provided you is called Signs and Symptoms of Brain Injury, and it looks like this. And I gave it to you in English and in Spanish. This has a good listing of all of the different kinds of signs and symptoms of brain injury. I thought it might be helpful to you. Just to go over a few that are very common, you'll want to look if your child has had a brain injury, pay attention for if they are having trouble paying attention. Are they having trouble staying on task? Are they slower to respond or slower to speak when you're communicating with them? Do they have problems with their organizational skills? Have you noticed a change in their academic performance on their grades? Are they having confusion? Following multi-step instructions, that's a big one, and you can test them. Give them the three-step instructions. See if they can do that. Give them four-step instructions. Give them three-step instructions, like take out your book, turn to page 52, and do numbers 1 and 2. See if your child can do that. If not, see if they could do 2 steps. So that will help you when you're communicating with the teachers to let the teachers know, oh, my child has trouble with 3-step instructions, but they're better with 1 or 2-step instructions. Now, for communication, some children after brain injury have trouble understanding what is being said to them, which is receptive language. Others have trouble with their expressive language or expressing themselves while using language. And then pragmatics. I see this a lot in students. After a brain injury, their social use of language may change. They may now have trouble communicating with their friends. They may be interrupting more, talking out of turn, dominating discussions, speaking too loudly, interrupting, standing too close to the listener in their personal space. So those are also things to watch out for. Physically, headaches are one of the number one ongoing signs after a brain injury, followed by fatigue. Blurred vision is very common. Alertness, sensitivity to light, sensitivity to noise, very, very common. They may have a loss of taste, a loss of smell. And typically, after a brain injury, like after someone has COVID, if they have lost their smell, they lose it in both nostrils. But after a brain injury, it's typically only in one nostril. So that's just a little bit of trivia for you. They may be dizzy or off balance, and their sleep may be disrupted. They may have trouble falling asleep, staying asleep. Okay, and then behavioral and emotional changes. So look for if they are all of a sudden impulsive. Are they more vulnerable now? Are they risk takers now? Do they have changes in their mood? Are they more explosive? Are they withdrawn, anxious, depressed, confused? All of these could be signs of their brain injury. Now, what impact does a brain injury have on the developing brain of a child? So the child's brain develops almost for 30 years, the first 30 years of life almost. Their brain is not fully developed until the mid to late 20s. That is when full myelination occurs to their neurons. And there are peaks and valleys through the years as the child goes through school. Their brain is also maturing and developing, and it comes in peaks. And So, a child who sustains a prior brain injury may experience new difficulties with behavior and learning as they age. And the reason for this is because the brain matures. If you look at this slide here, it shows ages 5 to over age 20. And it's a brain scan, excuse me, of the same brain. And you can see this is a normal brain, and the blue equals brain maturation. Now, this stops at age 20, but we know that the brain matures until the mid to late 20s. But it shows here that at age 5, there's not a lot of maturation, right? It's not until age 20 that the brain looks like it's almost fully matured. And this is why, if a 5-year-old has a brain injury to the frontal lobe, for instance, that's the area right here. And that is the largest lobe of the brain. So it tends to be the lobe that's injured the most. And your frontal lobes house your executive function skills or your higher order thinking skills. And those are required to be independent learners at school. But when you're 5 years old, you aren't tapping into your higher order thinking skills that are housed right here because you don't need them yet, right? They're not developed yet. They don't really start kicking in. We don't call on them as teachers. We don't expect students to start using their frontal lobe higher order thinking skills until around, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, on through high school. We expect them to be more independent then. And that's what your higher order thinking skills are for. Well, this may be the time when we see that 5-year-old's brain injury. The 5-year-old's now maybe 16 years old. This may be when we see their damage, the true damage to their frontal lobes emerge. So it's very important that you monitor, that everyone monitor in schools students who have brain injury, because what you see at age 5 or what you see when they first return to school may not be what you see a few years from now. And this is another slide that I love to use because it shows the first 7 years of life. These are the peaks and valleys of the sensitive periods of brain development. Look at everything that's going on right around the ages of 2 or 3. So, you really, 2 or 3, if you're 2 or 3, that's a terrible time to have a brain injury, right? Because all of this development is coming online. It's laying down the basic blocks for numbers and peer social skills and language and emotional control and vision and hearing. So therefore, anything that is in process of developing a skill could be impacted by a brain injury. So that's why it's very important that for younger children with brain injuries that they are seen by their pediatrician regularly for their well child visits, because the doctors do check developmental milestones, and that's really what we focus on in our young children with brain injuries, because we want to make sure that they're keeping up with where they should be after their injury. So, injury to the developing brain can cause devastating lifelong consequences, but not for all children. So, some with brain injury may have lifelong issues, others may adapt well and not. It varies. But skills that are in that rapid state of development at the time of the brain injury are much more vulnerable to being disrupted. So, infants who sustain a brain injury have little prior knowledge and life experiences to support their recovery. What that means is, I have already gone through all of my schooling. I'm an adult, right? I went through college. I have all my knowledge I need. And therefore, if I had a brain injury now, I may fare better than a 2-year-old who's going to have to do all of their learning on a brain that's experienced damage. It will be harder for them to access learning. Whereas if I had a brain injury right now, I have all of my years of schooling that will tend to remain intact. So your prior skills, or your prior memories, your prior knowledge after a brain injury usually doesn't disappear. It's your ability to learn in the future that's impacted. Now, this is a slide that shows normal development. It goes in an upward trajectory over time. And this red superimposed on it shows when a brain injury happens. And then we start to see the line go back up. But you see, in some cases, that child who's represented by the red, after their injury, may never catch up to the developmental momentum of their peers over time. And in some cases, not all cases, but in some cases, what we see happen is this term has been coined by Dr. Sandra Chapman at the University of Texas. She's listed on this slide. And the term is neurocognitive stall. And so what that means is that over time we see that gap widen between the student and their same age peers as learning becomes more complex, social relationships become more complex, and we sometimes, in some cases, not all students, but in some, we see them just kind of start to putter out in their development of learning. And this is when we need to make sure that they're being extra supported. So in this slide, it shows the 2 points that we want to make sure kids are supported immediately at the time of their brain injury. And then when they go back to school, it's not immediate, it's not support them just that one time. We have to support them until they graduate from high school because we want to make sure that we're monitoring them for any future issues that could emerge so we can immediately provide supports rather than waiting until they fail and then provide supports. How is brain injury different from other disabilities? Well, first, we all know the damage to the brain is sudden. So that's number one. Number two, damage occurs to the developing brain, which we've been talking about. Number three, there are pre-learning versus post-learning changes. And that's really what you want to focus on when you're talking to your school staff, your teachers of your child. What changes have occurred pre-injury versus post-injury? Peer relationship issues. I talked earlier about how communication and pragmatics, the social language that kids use, we all use to communicate with other people could be an issue after brain injury. Behaviors, negative behaviors a child has could interfere with their peer relationships. Many things can interfere with peer relationships, and that's something to really schools should focus on is building a circle of support around the student after a brain injury because we know that there can be issues in making and keeping friends. And most kids go to school to see their friends, right? Of course, they go to learn, but their number one thing is they want to be social. We're social creatures. So, how do we keep peer relationships going? Oh, number three, I need to tell you. So, new learning tends to be more difficult after injury, and prior learning strategies that the student may have used before their injury may no longer work. Also, there are more extreme discrepancies and scattered performance. And what that means is it causes frustration sometimes for teachers because a student may study all night long, and then the next day they may fail the test or they may be able to do their basic multiplication facts, Monday and Tuesday, and Wednesday, they may look like, what? I have no idea how to do that. So it's a very scattered performance that teachers commonly see after a brain injury. And for some kids, there may be a sudden change in their educational placement. So that means going from regular education, maybe to special education for some students. Teaching is challenging if you're a teacher. Also, one symptom can trigger a cascade of other symptoms. So let's look at this. What we have is if a student is having headaches at school, we can't just think, oh, they're having headaches. No, we have to really think about all the things that this headache can cause. If you have a headache and you are in school and your head hurts, your attention is not where it should be. You aren't able to pay attention maybe because your head hurts so bad. And if you are not paying attention and your teacher's lecturing and you have a headache, the information is not getting into your short-term memory. And if that information doesn't get into your short-term memory, it's not getting into your long-term memory. And if the information doesn't get into your long-term memory, you aren't going to learn and you're going to fail your tests, right? And this causes frustration. So it's a cyclical cycle of symptoms. And so a goal should be to really support the student academically with breaks built in and copies of teacher notes and things that can help them succeed in school after their brain injury so that we keep them below their symptom threshold. And what that means is we want to make sure the students are in school well supported so they are not experiencing symptoms that would interfere with their learning. Of course, it's impossible to 100% keep students from being symptomatic in school, but that should really be the goal of it, of teachers. Mental health issues, very, very common after brain injury. Post-traumatic stress disorder is common if the injury was caused by something traumatic. Depression, anxiety, panic attacks, suicidal ideation, obsessive compulsive disorder, and grief. Grief is also common because students, remember I told you you remember your past, right? It's your prior knowledge doesn't go away. So a student with a more severe brain injury remembers who they used to be, and they have to reconcile who they used to be with who they are now. And if they have a lot of changes and deficits in weak areas now because of their brain injury, that can be very difficult and can also lead to mental health issues. So, it's very important to monitor for mental health issues. Also, children and adults with brain injury often exhibit a lack of awareness of their injury imposed deficits. So that means if they have a new area of weakness, they may not recognize it. I had a student once I was working with who had a severe brain injury. He came back to school. He was now in special education. He used to be in regular education, and he could not understand why he was no longer in his science classes, his AP science classes, because he wanted to be a doctor. And unfortunately, his cognitive issues were going to prevent that from happening. But it was very hard watching him try to understand this new now for him. Also, students have more extreme discrepancies and unpredictable progress. Not all the time, but many. And when a student comes back to school after their injury, they may have rapid gains that occur the first 1 to 2 years, 1 to 3 years after their injury. What this means is if they receive a 504 plan or an IEP for special education, it needs to be reevaluated more frequently than just annually because their goals are going to need to change as they experience some recovery during those first several years. So that's a really important thing because this is a kind of disability that schools aren't used to having to go back and reevaluate educational plans because they're used to doing that every year. So as a parent, you'll want to make sure that you ask that it be relooked at. I would say after a month, 2 months, 3 months for the first 2 years, definitely. So now return to school, academic supports. So when kids come back to school after a brain injury, often we see them have more symptoms than they may have experienced while they were at home. And that's just because of all of these things that are on the screen. So it's loud, it's a bright environment. It may be an overly print rich environment because that's what our classrooms in elementary schools especially look like. The posters and colors everywhere and stations everywhere and a lot of group learning. So when kids come back to school, and even every year after that, some students, the best teacher that everyone wants for their fourth grade, for instance, may not be the best teacher for the student after a brain injury, because usually the teacher that everyone wants is the popular teacher who is doing all of these things, very colorful, busy room, constant movement, constant music, constant everything. And that may be too overstimulating after a brain injury, because after a brain injury, students really need structure. They need a teacher that isn't always missing school, substitutes. We don't want that. We want someone that's really there a lot, someone who's very structured, pretty rigid. That is where we see kids after brain injury do their best. Now, in school, there are tiers of academic support, no matter what public school you go to. Any school can implement informal adjustments to academics. And what that means is when a student comes back, for instance, with a concussion, often the school will do informal adjustments where they'll say, okay, for the next few weeks, we're going to monitor this student. They are having headaches. They are having cognitive fatigue. So we are going to build in some rest breaks for them. We want the teachers to give them copies of notes. We want them to, not do physical activity during PE class. And these can all be informal adjustments. But if the student isn't getting better, and there's not a hard and fast timeline for moving to the next tier of support, but really I always say about 4 weeks. If a student isn't getting better, whether it's a concussion or more moderate brain injury, then the school really needs to look at putting in place a formal written document called a 504 plan. Now, you can't just ask for a 504 plan and get one. There's a process involved we'll talk about. And your child actually has to qualify for it. So that's the other caveat. So if accommodations are not enough for a child and they're still struggling in school, then you move to not the bottom tier, the third tier, which is in red, and that is special education, which is provided through an IEP, which we will talk about in a moment. So 504 service plans, 504 plans, 504 service agreements, called all different things. This is not special education, but it is a formal, legally binding document. And basically, it's the definition to qualify for one is a person with a disability is any person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially, and that is the key word, it has to substantially limit one or more major life activities. They have to have has a record of such impairment or is regarded as having such impairment. So basically, if you've been diagnosed with a brain injury and it substantially limits a major life function. So what's a major life function? Here are 13 examples. These are not all inclusive, but I did highlight in green the ones that are commonly seen after acquired brain injury. If a student is substantially having issues with seeing, hearing, walking, learning, reading, thinking, concentrating, sleeping after a brain injury, they will likely qualify for a 504 plan. And that would give them a document all of their teachers would receive that has accommodations on it that every teacher legally must follow. What happens if a teacher does not follow it? Well, the Office of Civil Rights is who we have typically worked with in the past. That office may be changing, I've heard, but I think that's still the correct office. Now, special education is the highest level of intense supports that a student can receive at school, and it is given through an individualized education program or an IEP. Now, depending on what state you're from, the federal definition for special education is called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. And I'm in Pennsylvania, and we follow the federal definition, which is listed here, of traumatic brain injury And we follow all of these. But some states do not. So, for instance, traumatic brain injury is a category for special education. There is another category, number 9, called other health impairment. If you're in Pennsylvania and you have a brain tumor, that is not a traumatic brain injury, right? Because it's caused by an internal force. So it's a non traumatic brain injury, but it's still an acquired brain injury. So 8 and 9 fall under that acquired brain injury umbrella term. But if you're in Pennsylvania and you have a brain tumor and you need special education, you would be classified not as traumatic brain injury, you would be classified as other health impairment. Some states have changed this term and they have taken traumatic brain injury and changed it to acquired brain injury, which is what every single state should do. I'm going to go on record by saying that. Every state should have that. We don't. Most states do not. But there are a few states that have changed it. It just makes things easier for all of us in the education field. Because we want to make sure that brain injury does not get lost in the paperwork. And if something's labeled other health impairment, it may get lost. So that's why if you're a parent, make sure you are reminding the school every year at your meetings that, my child has had a brain injury. Now, under the federal law, traumatic brain injury was added in 1990 as a specific category requiring specialized understanding. I'm not going to read this definition, but it is the definition of the federal definition for if you have a traumatic brain injury, you may qualify if you're a child for special education under this. It's called an exceptionality of traumatic brain injury if you fall under this definition. Now, that's just to qualify. Your child may need placement in a regular education class with pull-out services by special education. They may need full day special education classroom. It all varies. But related services may also be included. So at school, that includes speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling services, psychological services, social services, and transportation. These can fall under special education on an IEP if your child qualifies. And they qualify after an evaluation is conducted by the school, a meeting is held, the parent attends the meeting, you discuss, and then the school tells you what their evaluation found, and you could either agree with it or disagree with it. And then that's a whole nother topic. But hopefully, if your child needs it, they will qualify for it and receive it. Now, therapies that they receive in school are not exactly the same as therapies they could receive at like a rehabilitation or a hospital when they do like outpatient speech therapy, for instance. Instead, they only receive therapies in school if after an evaluation it shows that it's educationally required. So it has to be impacting their education in some way. Whereas the definition for receiving PT, OT, speech in the community-based setting, like a hospital or rehab center, their definition is much broader. But in school, it has to relate to education. Also, just because someone has a medical diagnosis of brain injury does not automatically mean that they will receive a 504 plan for accommodations or an IEP for special education. So these are just highlights to let you know what is available out there. Now, a handout that I have given you is what we use in Pennsylvania. All IEPs across the United States, depending on what state you're in, are a little bit different, but all of them have the same key core information. So I have given you Pennsylvania's guide that we created at Brain Steps. So it breaks down every IEP section of the individualized education program and what you should consider if your child has had a brain injury. Please use this. Even if you're not from Pennsylvania, you will see that these same areas are in your IEP. So it's going to have a section of student demographics. It's going to have a section where it's going to ask you their present levels. Every IEP has that. You want to make sure in the present levels that that brain injury is written out, because if not, it can get lost over the years in the paperwork. So please review this. We have it very, very detailed. You can take this with you to your IEP meetings at the school while they're creating the IEP if your child qualifies for special education. And this will walk you through every single question you should ask on that IEP to make sure that everything they need is going to be covered, hopefully. Okay, so that is what that document handout is. It's called a guided IEP for brain injury. Okay, so now the meat of this. How can you help school staff understand your child's needs? First, parents or caregivers can initiate the school-based process for academic supports. So that's a 504 plan or special education by sending a letter. A written parent request triggers the start of a formal timeline that the public school must follow. And that is important to know. So I've given you a letter also in your handout that you can copy and fill it in with your information specific to your child. But you're going to write that letter. You're going to send it to your child's principal, special education director, school counselor, and school nurse. Send it to all four of them. That way, you're touching all the bases. Notify them that your child had a brain injury and what age. It may have occurred 10 years ago. Your child may be experiencing issues now. You can send this letter now if they're not being supported the way that you feel that they need it. List the symptoms your child is experiencing. List any difficulties your child may be experiencing since the brain injury. List any changes. That's key here, pre and post changes. So maybe before your child excelled in math and now they're failing math. Maybe before the teachers used to always tell you your child pays attention so well in school. And now 5 years later, they're telling you your child is not paying attention in school. Those are changes, and those are important to tell the school about. Ask that your letter be placed in your child's permanent educational file. So if there are future learning or behavior concerns, their brain injury diagnosis will not be forgotten. If a parent has the following, parent or caregiver, include it with your letter. If not, obtain copies of it and send it to the school afterwards. So if you have a paper from your doctor with a medical diagnosis, maybe it's from the emergency department, maybe it's from your pediatrician, maybe it's from your neurologist, all it needs to say is what kind of brain injury or that this child has had a brain injury, include that. Include any recent medical, rehabilitation, or neuropsychological reports that you have copies of. It will be very helpful to the school. Then, once this letter is sent by you, your school will have a certain number of days that they have to evaluate your child and make a determination whether or not they qualify for academic accommodations in a 504 plan or whether they need more intensive supports in special education. Like in Pennsylvania, for instance, it's 60 days. It varies. Some are 50 some days, some are 60 days. And usually there are 60 school days. This is an example of what the handout looks like. Just make sure you sign it, keep a copy of it for your own files. And now I want to teach you a little bit of how to understand your child's injury. So I'm going to teach you what we do when we are helping students after a brain injury. I want you to investigate your child's medical and rehabilitation records. Gather the records that you have, ask for copies, any of the discharge reports that you may have, look at them. Do the records mention a specific area of the brain that was injured? Oftentimes, it will list the lobes that may have been injured: the frontal lobes, occipital lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, cerebellum, the midbrain. Do the records indicate there was damage on the left side of the brain or the right side of the brain? These are all important. These are things that I, who have been in this field for 30 years, who have been trained to figure out what a student needs after their brain injury. This is my thinking. Okay. So this is what I do. I scan the records. I pull the areas out where it shows that there was damage to these areas. And the reason for that is because if we know the frontal lobe was injured, these are the functions that are your frontal lobe is responsible for. Okay. If your temporal lobe, your child's temporal lobe right here, the blue area here, if that was injured, these bullets are what resides mainly in the temporal lobe area. The parietal lobe is up here in the red area on my graphic, and I've listed what the main things. Now, the brain is all wired, so really you could hit your head, you know, on the side and still have executive function issues up here in your frontal lobe. But we're talking generally, right? Right now, we are just looking big picture. Okay, if the occipital lobe in purple on this graphic was injured, that's where your visual processing takes place. So if I am going to be working with a child and I know that they had a basal skull fracture, that is at the base of their skull. That is where the occipital lobe is. Immediately, I'm going to think, okay, when I am with this child, I am going to do some tasks to investigate how their visual processing is. How are they seeing things? Can they do things, visually? And then the cerebellum is here in orange. The cerebellum is responsible for coordination, balance, procedural learning. So this is like a little cheat sheet for you. This is why it's important to know what the medical records tell us. Was there a skull fracture? If it says yes, where? What lobe was it over? The temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe? Find out where. Was there a brain bleed? Blood that's in the brain shouldn't be there, right? And there's not a lot of area in the brain for a lot of bleeding to take place. And blood is toxic to brain material. So if there was a bleed, find out where it was. What region of the brain, where is it? And what is that area of the brain responsible for? What function, what skills? It doesn't necessarily mean because there's a skull fracture here that your child's automatically going to always have issues with hearing because that's in the temporal lobe. Okay. No, that does not mean that. That means that it could be. So again, we are looking at what we want to monitor over time when that child first comes back to school. And then over the years, these are the areas we want to keep an eye on because that is what was injured. Was there a cut, a bruise, or a bump on the outside of their head? Where? What area of the brain? Where is it? Document all of this. Does it mention brain swelling at all in the medical records? Is there a reference to the child having had a craniotomy, which is where they remove a part of the skull, usually due to brain swelling to release that, or a burr hole, which is where they drill a hole, also if there's swelling, things like that. Was there a lack of oxygen to the brain? Sometimes a child may have a cardiac arrest, and that leads to a lack of oxygen getting to the brain. Or you may see the term DAI, diffuse axonal injury. So I look for terms like this. And anytime I see these terms, I know that, okay, so there's not necessarily going to be damage to a specific region of the brain. Instead, when these three things are there, I think, okay, there's more global damage. A lack of oxygen to the brain, for instance, isn't going to be just in the frontal lobe. It's likely globally, which means anywhere in the brain could have been impacted. It's harder to plan for students with more global issues like that, but it's not impossible by any means. All that to say, you may look at the medical records and there may not be one single visible sign in the medical records. There could be a clear CAT scan, clear MRI brain scan, no bumps on the head, no skull fractures, no brain bleeds, no nothing. That does not mean that your child did not have a brain injury and may not have long lasting issues. So we know from concussions do not show up on brain scans, but some students have lifelong issues after experiencing one or more. So I'm just trying to teach you how to think like someone who has been trained to work with students who've had a brain injury so that you can help your school better understand it. Okay, if your child has been lucky enough to have a neuropsychological evaluation, that's great. Neuropsych evaluations look at the child's ability to learn in the future, right? That's what's impacted after injury. Their cognitive processes moving forward. So somewhere in that report, towards the end, there should be a list of school support recommendations. Those are critical to give to your school. You can give them the whole report, or you could give them just the recommendations. Look at the end of the report, any medical report. There's always a summary and conclusion section. Review that. That will give you a good basis for your child's strengths and areas of weakness. You want to use your child's strengths to compensate for areas that they may have, some weak areas now. Take notes, share this information with your child's school. Also, speech, physical therapy, occupational therapy. If your child was in the hospital and then rehabilitation or outpatient rehab, they will be giving you reports or discharge reports and read those, and it will give you a good sense of their strengths and areas of weakness that will help you communicate to the school staff what they need. Then my suggestion is if your child's had a brain injury, contact your state's Department of Education, Bureau of Special Education, and your school district's administration. Ask them if they have a brain injury school consultant on staff. Some do, some don't. Most districts don't. Some do, though. So make sure you ask both number one and number two if they have someone. If they do, ask that they attend school meetings with you. And then monitor your child over time. Make sure, though, you alert school staff if you notice any changes to learning or behavior, because again, we want to try to catch students before they're failing to give them supports they need. Now, transitions after brain injury tend to be difficult for kids for whatever reason. So whether going from preschool to kindergarten, from kindergarten to, or from grade to grade, from middle school to high school, these transitions are difficult. We need to plan for them. So we always say that it's good to request as a parent or caregiver that the school hold a transition meeting during the summer prior to your child's transition that next year, even if it's from 7th to 8th grade, so that you can meet with your child and their new teachers to ensure that they understand your child's needs. You could also ask to tour the school or the classroom to help alleviate your child's concerns. Now, in Pennsylvania, we use these binders we created. They're called Brain Steps Student Care Binders. I have given you three. I know I'm going to be running out of time, but I have given you all three of our binders. They are specific to Pennsylvania, but you can either recreate these for your own or just print them and use them because the information in them is helpful. When we work with a student who is ages 0 to 5 in Pennsylvania, we give their parent the early childhood brain injury care binder. I've given you the inserts. You can print them out and put them in a 3-ring binder just like here. It is full of information about me pages, facts about preschool brain injury, developmental milestones at each age that you can look at and say, okay, my child was injured during this age of development. Did they get that skill? Are they behind in that skill? And it has different sections so that parents can keep medical records, educational records, all of their important things for their child. And they take these binders with them to their school meetings every time they have a school meeting. It keeps them organized. it helps them uh, share information about their child with the school. Then, when the child enters kindergarten, we give them the student care binder. Now, again, this goes to the parents and caregivers. This replaces the early childhood binder, and it's more for elementary students. Then in high school, we created what's called a brain injury passport. Sharon Grandinetti is someone who created this brain injury passport, and we loved it. So we took it and we modified it. And this is something that a high school student in 9th through 12th grade fills out with school staff. They keep it in their own binder at school, but it helps them to self advocate for their own needs because once they graduate from high school, they are going to need to know how to self advocate for their own needs. They need to know their strengths. They need to know their areas of weakness. And this should be revised each year. I've given you a copy of this in the transition age student binder. So, children in Pennsylvania, their parents get all three binders. But again, I've given them all to you. Feel free to use them. Feel free to do whatever you want to do with them. I hope they're helpful. Now, if your child is little and entering school and they have a brain injury or they're returning to school after a more severe brain injury, I suggest making a picture book. It can be really helpful with actual pictures. So this is my school. This is the bus I'm going to ride. So it really helps to acclimate the student to these are my teachers because, after a brain injury, it's going to take them some time to get adjusted to their schedule and what their school is like and where they're going. And with that being said, when kids come home, you may hear the teacher say, "Oh, he's so good in school." And then he comes home and he melts down. That is because you are where his comfort is. He knows some kids can hold it together all day, and then they come home and the parents and caregivers receive the brunt of that. This is normal. There are strategies I have put in here. We're not going to get to all of them, but they're concrete strategies that you can use in the home setting to help. So students need, after a brain injury, structure. When they're home, visual schedules. This one has no pictures on it, but if they're a young child, they may need pictures rather than words like snack and relax or, video games. But this is for a student that's probably in late elementary school, and it shows them every step of the evening what their evening's going to look like. This helps. This helps. Keeping a structured routine, make one for the morning, waking up, brushing teeth, eating breakfast, getting backpack together. Also, a notebook where you can send it to school, a small notebook, and you can have the parent sends the teacher little notes about, oh, here's how my child is doing this today. The teacher can write back, here's how Joey did or Sally did today in school, and is there follow-up needed? Here's an example. He did not sleep well. He had a rough morning. He has a new medication today. Please watch for side effects from the mother. And then the teacher wrote, he did well in math today using cue cards. He seemed very tired after lunch, needed 3 extra breaks, and then it reminds the mom that he has a math test tomorrow. So this is nice because it's constant communication and it's quick and it's easy, but it keeps the communication flowing, and that's what you need to do. I'm not going to go through spaced retrieval, but if you are trying to study with your child for a test, use spaced retrieval. I gave you 2 slides that talk about it, or 1 slide that talks about it. Cue cards are another example. You could Google any of these since I don't have time to go through them all. But also paying attention checklists, use timers. We can talk about that later. And self-regulation. Self-regulation is often impacted after brain injury. So we teach children scripts. What is my plan? How much time will this take me? And it's things that we say repeatedly until the child starts saying it repeatedly to themselves. That is self-regulation. So when I get stuck, I will ask my teacher, right? And those are scripts that you can use with your child, and then they will start to take on and start to say it themselves internally. We all use self-talk scripts, and that is really important to teach children after brain injury. With that being said, I guess I needed 2 hours. So please look at the rest of these slides because they are some really core concrete strategies that we use all the time. I also gave you a lot of handouts with some great strategies that are helpful for kids after a brain injury. And I know we did not get to questions today, but you have my contact information because it's on your handout. And I just want to say every state should have a brain injury association. If they don't, try to start one. Look and see if your state has a brain injury association because they have support groups, they do things, conferences, resource webinars. It's a great form of support and it's helpful for families, caregivers, and children. There's my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email and I would be happy to respond. I'm sorry I didn't get to questions today, but I am happy that you were here and I hope that you found today valuable and I hope that your child succeeds in school and with your support. They definitely will because no one advocates for a child like their parents and caregivers. So you are their best advocate.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brenda. This is very informative. Really appreciate your time. Thank you
Or
so much. And thanks everyone for joining us and have a good day.
thank you.
Thanks.